This is a big one in Victoria at the moment. It raises questions again about how the Andrews government awards billion-dollar contracts. We saw during hotel quarantine, didn't we? Pretty dodgy there. And serious questions still remain now about transparency, probity, the value for money for taxpayers. It's been revealed that a company called Conduent has been awarded a $1.7 billion 15-year contract to upgrade the state's subpar Myki system. So if you're outside of Victoria, that's the ticketing system you use. It's a little white card to get on and off public transport. Revealed yesterday that the awarding of this contract came down to 3 bidders. Conduent, who got it, a British transport firm called Cubic, and a Japanese firm called NTT Data. Now, Cubic's since written to Daniel Andrews asking that he review what they regard as a flawed tender process. And amongst their complaints is a claim that the procurement team did not factor in overseas experience, didn't factor in that their bid was $100 million cheaper for taxpayers. And they went on to say this gave Conduent, they think, a significant opportunity to explain and improve its offer, an opportunity that was not given to their firm, Cubic. Now, in typical Dan Andrews fashion, there was nothing to see here.
And politicians don't sit down and evaluate the bids. Independent experts and those who provide advice to government, so independent public servants, oversighted by a probity auditor, got no advice to suggest that there's any issues with this process. Indeed, quite the contrary.
Joining me now to discuss is Victorian Shadow Minister for Public Transport, Richard Riordan. Richard, welcome to the program. Why is this contract and how it's been awarded such a worry, do you think, for taxpayers?
Peter, this contract is an enormous worry for not only myself as Shadow Minister for Public Transport, but it should be a huge alarm for all Victorians. This new contract is supposed to provide the ticketing right across Victoria. So this is no longer just an issue about the people in Melbourne. It's the issue for all Victorians. Whether you get on a B-line train in Wodonga or down in Warrnambool or get on a tram in Brunswick, you are going to be affected by this. And we are paying, based on the other 2 contractors who've contacted me, and I've spoken with them extensively over recent days, hundreds and hundreds of millions of dollars more, Peter. And what's really alarming is these companies all believe that it was late last year when the government and the people they were dealing with made it really clear to them that really no one else was going to get a look in on this. And what's concerning is that we are tying ourselves for 15 years on a $1.7 billion contract that has plus extras thrown in on top of it. Now, the other 2 bidders, one being Cubic, was around $1.6 billion, and it was a fixed price, all you need contract. And NTT Data, which does Singapore. Now, you can't not look at Singapore and understand that it's 4 times the size of the Victorian public transport in terms of volume of people. It's a world leader, and it was $700 million cheaper. And under questioning yesterday, Peter, the minister responsible, Minister Carroll, made it clear that despite sending bureaucrats on junkets around the world, none of his people had actually seen the system work. And what we've learnt is it's in 400 jurisdictions, 26 countries, and not one of them has a genuine contactless public transport system. And that was the sole purpose of this new tender, was to bring us into the 21st century. We're halfway through it, but to catch up to the rest of the world. And sadly, Victorians have been sold a pup and are going to be left picking up a big bill with a poor service for the next 15 years.
Just on the Singapore system, I've used the Singapore public transport system. I think it's absolutely world class. Are you saying that taxpayers sent people overseas to do all these assessments, to look at where the various bidders have projects that run in other jurisdictions, and they didn't go and have a look at them in operational terms? Explain. I can't follow that.
Well, sadly, they've gone and looked at them, but ignored what they've seen. And we saw the minister in question time 2 weeks ago, and again under questioning at PAYAC, say that Victorians are going to have a tap and go system, which is now standard in Singapore, Sydney, New York, London. But instead they've gone for the one company that has botched it up right around the world. So, for example, Peter, the most obvious example is Paris. Paris picked Conduent to do tap-and-go public transport for their Olympics, which are on next year. They've publicly announced that they don't have the system ready and they can't do it. And guess what? Good old Melbourne, good old Dan Andrews has gone and picked the one company in the world to get ours tap and go and ready for the Commonwealth Games, and it simply won't be done in time because the company doesn't have the technology functioning to make it work. Meanwhile, the other bidders who are cheaper, quicker, and in fact, NTT Data claims that they could have had it up and running 2 years ago, but certainly could have had it going in the next 6 months. And we've turned our back to them and handed over hundreds of millions more for a less operable system.
Oh, look, I'm sure you're looking into this, but my experience with hotel quarantine is to look now at the company that got the winning bid and see what connections they might have to Andrews government ministers or, you know, unions that are mates with the Premier. I mean, this is the sort of stuff that goes on in Victoria. How concerned are you about the probity of procurement in Victoria?
We are very concerned, and John Pizzuto and myself have announced that we will be calling on a parliamentary inquiry into this. And the rate that the rats are running from the ship, Peter, and leaking to me, I'm running a 24-hour call centre on this at the moment. Everyone's coming to the fore, and you don't have to do much of a Google search to see that there are links right throughout the procurement process that all point back to the company that won it. And this is a huge concern. And in coming days, we will have more information on this and be raising it. And Parliament sits in 2 weeks' time. I'm sure we will have most of our ducks lined up by then. But this is going to make the hotel quarantine poorly run procurement and the botch up that was look like a walk in the park. Peter, this is an enormous sum of money. In a state where we've cut road funding here in Victoria by 45% over the last 2 years, which pales compared to the amount they're about to overpay for public transport ticketing. It's actually scandalous, and whether you live in Melbourne or country Victoria, you ought to be concerned about your use of your money in this terribly wasteful way.
Well, I'll look forward to whatever you can dig up. Richard Riordan, thank you.